If you've ever wondered why some people at the top seem immune to remorse, stay with us. In this episode, you'll discover why guilt fades as power rises, how systems suppress empathy, and why the most dangerous leaders often feel the least. You'll hear the shocking truth behind corporate crimes, explore the neuroscience of conscience, and uncover why feeling too much can cost you everything. They made decisions that displaced millions, signed papers that led to wars, ignored warnings that cost lives, and yet they smiled for the cameras, slept peacefully. So here's the question no one wants to ask. Do the most powerful people in the world even feel guilt? In this episode, we dive into the twisted intersection of psychology, neuroscience, and society to understand why power seems to numb the conscience and why some people sleep just fine while others carry the weight of the world. It was called a miracle drug, OxyContin, safe, effective, low risk of addiction, or so they claimed. But Purdue Pharma knew it was addictive, knew it was deadly, and still they pushed it. They didn't just market it, they engineered a crisis. Sales reps were trained to pressure doctors, to target the poor, the injured, the desperate, to treat pain not as a symptom, but as a market. They pushed higher dosages, stronger prescriptions, off-label use. Doctors who prescribed the most were flown to conferences, given perks, applauded, and when patients came back addicted, they were told it wasn't addiction, just under treatment. The solution? More pills. They created language to deflect blame, calling addiction pseudo-addiction. They rewrote the narrative. They made billions. And while exact numbers are hard to calculate, estimates suggest the death toll may be in the hundreds of thousands, more than all American soldiers lost in recent wars. Not in an explosion, not in a war, but slowly, silently, in bathrooms, in parking lots, in bedrooms, next to children. And yet, no one from Purdue went to prison. Not a single Sackler family member faced trial. So how do you sell death and sleep peacefully? Psychologists call it moral disengagement. When guilt is spread across layers of command, it evaporates. No one feels responsible. You don't need to be cruel, you just need to follow procedure. You don't need to believe in what you're doing, you just need to meet the target. And once your conscience is split between departments, policies, legal teams, and risk assessments, what's left to feel guilty for? Neurologically, power reshapes the brain. Dr. Sukhvinder Obi, a neuroscientist at McMaster University, conducted a series of experiments. Participants primed to feel powerful simply by recalling a time they were in control showed reduced activity in the mirror neuron system. That's the part of the brain responsible for empathy, for feeling what others feel. Less activity means less emotional resonance, less recognition of pain, less guilt. It's not that power makes you evil, it just makes you distant, and distance is the enemy of conscience. So the CEO who signs off on overdose campaigns may not be a monster. He may simply feel nothing. Because in systems designed for efficiency, conscience becomes optional. Not all psychopaths are serial killers. Some run companies. They don't carry knives. They carry spreadsheets. They don't lurk in the shadows. They sit on boards. Dr. Robert Hare developed the Psychopathy checklist, a clinical tool used to assess psychopathy. It includes traits like manipulativeness, pathological lying, a lack of empathy, shallow affect, a grandiose sense of self-worth. Sound familiar? Because in corporate culture, these traits aren't just common, they're often celebrated. Charisma gets labeled as leadership. Cold decisions are called strategic. Risk-taking becomes vision. In fact, research suggests up to 20% of CEOs may show strong psychopathic traits, compared to 1% of the general population. And the higher the position, the less likely these traits are seen as warning signs. In systems that reward confidence over conscience, those traits become assets, not red flags. It's not that the suit hides the predator. Sometimes the suit is the predator. We glorify empathy. Be kind. Lead with compassion. Empathy makes us human. But in high-stakes environments, it's punished. Empathy slows decisions. Doubt complicates strategy. And in war, business, or politics, hesitation is weakness. There's no time to ask, how will this feel to them? Only, will it work for us? In military operations, empathy for the enemy can get your team killed. In a boardroom, it can derail a merger. In politics, it can be spun as softness. So the system trims it out, quietly, efficiently, like a tumor, even if it's a heart. And the leaders who do feel, they either harden or burn out. Because emotional labor has no bonus. You can't quantify guilt on a spreadsheet. You can't submit empathy as a KPI. So it gets sidelined. Evolution rewards what works, and what often works is cold. That's why the higher you climb, the more you're expected to leave empathy behind. Because in power games, kindness rarely survives the final round. But here's the cost no one talks about. The people who lose their empathy lose part of themselves. They may win, they may rise, they may dominate. But when the noise dies down and the spotlight fades, what's left? A legacy built on silence, a heart carefully turned off, a mind that made all the right moves but can't remember how to feel. Systems depersonalize responsibility. Orders come from the top. Damage happens at the bottom. Everyone's involved, so no one feels guilty. Bandura called it diffusion of responsibility. The more people involved in a decision, the less any one person feels accountable. But it goes deeper. In large organizations, moral decisions are often filtered through spreadsheets, key performance indicators, quarterly goals. Ethics becomes a metric. Conscience becomes an inconvenience. Morality is run through cost-benefit analysis, and guilt gets trimmed as overhead. It's not just that no one is guilty, it's that no one even stops to ask if guilt is warranted. This isn't just a loophole, it's the architecture. Systems reward efficiency, not ethics. Results, not reflection. Silence is easier to scale than scrutiny, and the higher you go, the more your survival depends on not noticing. That's why people who raise questions, who ask, should we do this, instead of can we, are often ignored or removed, not because they're wrong, but because they slow the machine. The system doesn't need monsters. It just needs functionaries who stop asking why. It's not that evil people rise, it's that rising requires silence, requires numbness, requires forgetting how to feel. And in the end, it's not that the system creates evil. It just creates people who no longer recognize it. We treat conscience like a moral compass, but it's not divine. It's emotional memory, a neural pattern shaped by pain, empathy, and consequence. Biologically, conscience evolved to stabilize groups, not deliver justice. It's a survival tool, not a spiritual gift. It helped early humans cooperate, punish cheaters, share resources, raise children, survive winters. In a tribe, someone without a conscience was a threat. But in a boardroom, in politics, in war, that same lack of conscience can be a competitive advantage, because conscience isn't some absolute moral force. It's context dependent, and it can be warped. What once made you hesitate before harming others can be repurposed to protect only your own, and like any tool, it can be turned off. Sometimes by force, sometimes by culture, sometimes by choice. But also, and this matters, conscience can be awakened. It can evolve, not just as a function of biology, but of awareness. A child raised in cruelty may suppress conscience to survive, but that same child, given safety and reflection, may rediscover it. It's not static. It grows, shifts, adapts. And like a muscle, the more you ignore it, the weaker it gets. But feed it with reflection, humility, empathy, and it strengthens, even in systems that try to starve it. So maybe conscience isn't just an evolutionary tool. Maybe it's the thing that lets us evolve beyond our programming. Some people resist, not with violence, not with power, but with honesty, and the unbearable burden of feeling. Snowden, Manning, Haugen, people who told the truth and paid the price. They weren't evil, they weren't saints, they were just unwilling to go numb. What they carried wasn't just information, it was emotional intelligence, the deep, painful awareness of what harm feels like. The ability to recognize suffering not just as data, but as damage. In a world that trains us to perform, to execute, to obey, emotional intelligence is dangerous because it sees what's not convenient and it refuses to shut up. But the system doesn't reward feeling, it isolates it. It labels it unstable, emotional, unprofessional. These people aren't celebrated until long after they're broken or gone. In the moment, they're a threat to the machine. Whistleblowers lose jobs, families, safety, health, and all for what? A footnote in a report, a headline that fades in a week. But here's the truth. They didn't speak up because it was strategic. They spoke up because their conscience screamed louder than the cost, because emotional intelligence told them, this matters, and no one else is going to say it. And while the world moves on, many of them never recover. They're left haunted by what they revealed and what it cost. Some disappear from public life. Some never work again. Some lose themselves entirely, not because they were weak, but because they were alone. The system doesn't fear evil, it fears awakening. And emotional intelligence is that awakening. It's the voice that whispers, wait, this is wrong, even when everyone else has gone quiet. Whistleblowers are the cracks in the illusion of moral neutrality. They remind us that silence is not safety, and that speaking the truth is, in many systems, the greatest threat of all. Because conscience doesn't protect you, it only proves you were still listening, and that somewhere inside you, humanity survived. In 1961, a Yale psychologist named Stanley Milgram ran an experiment that would haunt ethics boards for decades. Participants were told they were helping with a memory study. They sat in front of a machine with switches labeled with increasing voltages up to a deadly 450 volts. Their job? To administer a shock every time the learner, a man in the next room, got an answer wrong. What the participants didn't know, the learner was an actor. No one was actually being shocked. But the screams they heard, the cries for help, the pounding on the wall, all part of the script. And still, 65% of participants delivered the highest shock, even when the victim begged, even when he went silent, even when they thought they'd killed him. All it took was a man in a lab coat saying, "The experiment requires that you continue." They weren't sadists. They weren't monsters. They were just obedient. Milgram wanted to understand how ordinary people could commit atrocities. What he found was devastating. You don't need a gun to be dangerous. You just need the ability to obey. When someone in authority takes responsibility, we hand over our conscience. We trade our judgment for compliance. We stop asking, "Is this right?" and start asking, "Am I allowed to stop?" It's not that people want to cause harm. It's that they're more afraid of disobeying than they are of hurting someone. And in that moment, morality dies. Now layer this onto corporations, onto governments, onto systems where obedience is a job description. Suddenly, Milgram's subjects aren't an exception. They're a blueprint. Because when responsibility is outsourced and authority wears a suit, the voice inside us, the one that says no, gets quieter. Not because it's gone, but because we've been trained not to listen. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Milgram didn't uncover how people become evil. He uncovered how people stop feeling responsible. And in many systems, that's not a bug, it's a feature. So the next time you hear, "I was just doing my job," remember? That's how the worst things in history often begin, not with hatred, but with obedience. We like to think guilt is natural, that it rises up in us when something is wrong, that it's automatic, a moral reflex. But guilt is not just biological, it's cultural. And culture trains it out of us. From childhood, we're told to say sorry, but not necessarily to feel sorry. We apologize because it's polite, because it's expected, because it diffuses tension, not because we fully understand the harm. In school, guilt isn't explored, it's managed. We're taught rules, discipline, compliance, but not introspection, not emotional repair. We're punished for mistakes, not guided through their impact. So we learn to avoid blame, not to understand it, to escape guilt, not to grow from it. And then we enter systems, workplaces, hierarchies, bureaucracies, where guilt becomes inefficient, where questioning orders is seen as weakness, where feeling too much gets you labeled difficult. Emotional intelligence in these environments becomes a liability. It slows the workflow, interrupts the chain of command. And so we adapt. We harden, we distance, we joke it off. We call it just business. We call it staying professional. We stop asking, "Did that hurt someone?" and start asking, "Did I break a rule?" Because rule breaking has consequences, but harm? Only if someone makes a fuss. This isn't an accident. It's design. Guilt is suppressed not by force, but by reward. You climb faster if you don't dwell. You fit in better if you don't feel too much. And before you know it, silence becomes your second language. Discomfort becomes something to override, not examine. And conscience becomes background noise. But here's the twist. Guilt doesn't disappear. It accumulates quietly underneath the surface. And those who feel it, who still listen to that voice, often suffer in isolation. They're the ones awake in meetings when no one else blinks. The ones with stomach aches, no diagnosis can explain. Because when society teaches you to suppress guilt, it doesn't make you free. It just makes you quieter, more compliant, less you. And the people who resist that numbness, who stay emotionally awake, don't rise easily. But maybe they're the ones still human. Why the powerful win without emotional intelligence? Because emotional intelligence doesn't scale. not in systems built on speed, profit, control. Feeling slows you down. Doubt complicates decisions. Empathy demands too many questions, especially the inconvenient ones. And the people who ask those questions, they don't rise. They get sidelined, marked as too sensitive, too emotional. Not a good fit for leadership. Meanwhile, the ones who move fast, who don't flinch, who never look back, they climb. Not because they're better, but because they're easier to use. Emotional intelligence is a form of resistance. It resists cruelty. It resists simplification. It resists the idea that efficiency is always right. But systems don't reward resistance. They reward performance. And performance doesn't need a conscience. It just needs results. That's why the powerful often win without emotional intelligence. Because they're not burdened by the weight of consequences. Because they don't pause to imagine the pain on the other side of the policy. Because they've learned to see suffering as noise, not signal. And yet, the people who do feel, who can't look away, who carry every loss like a scar, they are the proof that something human still survives. They may not win, they may not be celebrated. But when the machines fall silent, when the numbers fade, when history asks what it cost us to succeed, it won't be the powerful who have the answer. It'll be the ones who still feel. Maybe power doesn't kill conscience. Maybe it just drowns it in noise, in numbers, in praise. And the ones who still feel, they hear what others tuned out, a whisper that says, "This isn't who we're meant to be." So if that voice is still alive in you, don't silence it. Don't apologize for it. Train it like a muscle. Because in a world that profits from numbness, your empathy is not a weakness. It's proof you're still human. This is Sci Alt Reality. If you're still with us, hit subscribe and stay awake. We're just getting started.